So I'll start. I've got a question.
Okay.
I'm a huge fan of your work, Dr. Kate. Your TED Talks are amazing. I've watched them multiple times. We talked about the fact that you are just the paragon of positivity and strength, and I really appreciate that. But tell me why you developed this interest in neuroscience after being a Marine. I mean, you're like at two opposite ends of the spectrum, because when most people think Marines, they don't think necessarily super smart. So tell me, how'd that come about?
I think that's, for women Marines in particular, I'm going to sound blatantly sexist here. I think that's unfair. I think most women Marines are wickedly intelligent because you have to be. You're, 4% of the officer corps, 7, sometimes 8% of the enlisted population. You're constantly swimming against a current. And I got into the whole bulletproofing your psyche, mental fitness, peak performance space because swimming against that current for 8 years took its toll on me. And when I left the Marine Corps, I struggled through a really badly done reintegration experience. I didn't have an identity as a civilian woman anymore. I didn't have friends outside of the Marine Corps. I had a lot of really unhealthy practices as it related to drinking, as it related to risk-taking behaviors. I was a little nuts. I wouldn't be friends with myself from 10, 15 years ago. But it wasn't until I was struggling through that process that I started looking at, okay, I'm not getting the outcomes that I want. I'm not optimally happy. I'm injuring myself in the weight room instead of training myself. Maybe all of this intensity and all of this work hard, play hard isn't working for me anymore. By the time I left the Marine Corps, I was 28 years old, and you only bounce for so long. I mean, what worked at 19 and 20 just isn't working as you approach 30. So I started studying what real strength is. What makes somebody resilient, what makes somebody perform at peak levels. And the science behind that is fascinating because it's not what I always thought. It's not constantly swimming against the current with no break, no respite, no down regulation of your nervous system. And when I realized, wow, some of the bad outcomes I personally experienced weren't a bad Marine, but systemically we were drinking the wrong Kool-Aid. And I got really passionate about this notion that future Marines didn't have to struggle as much as I did if we could start talking about mental fitness before leaving the service. And so that's a lot of the work that I do today.
Beautiful. Kelly and I have talked about her experiences in the Army, and Kelly, is there anything you want to add in terms of shared experiences? I mean, obviously Army a little bit different culturally than the Marine Corps, but is there anything about being a woman kind of swimming against the tide that resonated with you?
Actually, what resonated with me wasn't that piece of it, was the drinking piece.
Got it.
When I came back from Iraq after embedding with that infantry unit, after we'd lost so many guys, I did the same thing, just came back in reintegration as a journalist. There aren't a lot of us who are doing that kind of work. So I came back and I was working on the book, and I was doing the same sorts of things, drinking too much and working out, trying to address it that way and just not being able to. But that's why I'm most interested in hearing what you have to say about resiliency, because I definitely found that there were things that helped, that surprised me.
Well, and what you said about there weren't very many of us doing that work, or there weren't very many women in the military, there's this othering that happens that socially isolates us. So, in that minority situation, it can start to feel like you're a minority while you're serving or while you're embedded overseas with an infantry unit. You come back, nobody gets what you've been through, so you start to alienate and wall yourself off. And a bedrock of resilience is social cohesion and connectivity. So we start to see the adverse health effects the second we start walling ourselves off. And for me, it became, civilian was a pejorative term. There was an us and there was a them, and I had no idea how dangerous that was for my health. But culturally, especially at Parris Island, Marines were good people. Everyone else was kind of questionable, I sort of felt like. And you really do get used to spending time with your own like community. And even if that like community is embracing work hard, play hard, and isn't necessarily the most healthy accountability partner out there, it's dangerous. And I feel like there were so many times, it wasn't just about my own health, there were so many times I needed to be a bulwark or a buttress for a friend, and I took them to a bar instead. You know, I thought, hey, we'll go for a long run and then we'll go drinking, and that's going to help you feel better. And I didn't have the skills to help people get through their own struggles and traumas. And for me, losing friends to the reintegration, the stress of reintegration has really driven me to do what I do today. There are a lot of people that I love that are not okay today. And when I really mattered, I didn't have the skills to help them.
It's really, really interesting on both accounts, because I think the common denominator there, whether you're military or veteran or you've never been in the military, I think it goes to the point that you bring out multiple times in Bulletproofing the Psyche, your new book, in that when you are not in the in-group and you don't have in-group status, it impacts all different facets of your life in a really unhealthy way. So can you talk a little bit about what in-group status means and what you saw in the military and how it affected people, and maybe now how you're seeing it in women who've never been in the military?
Absolutely. Well, understanding that what makes somebody resilient at the foundational level is in-group status, social cohesion, lots of support. It actually offers more protective effect than quitting smoking or a host of things that we always hear, that'll kill you. Loneliness kills more than anything else. So in-group status is vital to human health, because to our nervous systems, it becomes a question of survival. I mean, not being part of a community used to be incredibly dangerous. And so we read social isolation, we read conflict with other people, we read a lack of belonging, which is something women in the Marine Corps certainly experience repeatedly throughout their career. We read that as a physical threat, like a bear chasing us across the lawn. So you have all of these neurophysiological symptoms that come along with that. And in my work today with veterans, I didn't start out trying to focus specifically on service women as a subpopulation, because a lot of the men in my life are veterans, some wounded, some have invisible wounds. I mean, I certainly always cared about veterans as a whole, but my military women come out with some different experiences with belonging and support that impact their resilience when they hit the transition stress. And some of my latest research has just indicated that these belonging issues are a huge problem. And the resources that we have when we get out, 70% of respondents in a very recent survey said they're not a member of those things. And 30% of that 70 said the reason is that they don't feel welcome. They don't feel they're included. And when they walk in the room, they question whether or not they'll be received.
Wow. And I think all of us have probably had some experience dealing with that. And then after a while, you just decide you're not going to bother trying. I think that that's probably a pretty common thing for women veterans. You talk about how growing up as the child of a Marine officer, infantryman, you talk about the challenges of that, but also how that made you stronger. And I think in one of your TED Talks, you use the term kick in the teeth. Like, tell me how, it's funny, we're talking about the challenges that women have, both civilian women and military women and veterans, but the reality is, I think what you're saying is that when it comes to resiliency, those little kicks in the teeth can make you have more bounce back ability, if you will. So can you talk about that?
I like that term. Well, and so that's the really cool thing, the empowering thing about resilience for anybody. If you experience hardship, and there's lots of great research studies that indicate if you experience hardship and then give yourself a planned period of nervous system de-escalation where your brain can drop down into theta state, a hormone in your body that's released during the stress response does this really important work of improving synaptic firing in the front portion of your brain, which is where upper level cognition and emotional regulation happens. So when you experience hardship, it's a blessing. so long as you give yourself a respite afterwards.
Mm.
And that's really for contemporary, for so many people that I talk to or who are interested in peak performance. We're great at pressing the gas. We're great at weathering hard things. But if you don't regularly insert what I like to call mental fitness training into your day, you don't get the benefit of that DHEA hormone improving your mental fitness and your resilience and your temerity. So the cool thing is, a little bit of a break, a little bit of a respite makes you smarter, faster, nicer, a better parent, a better professional, no matter what you've been through.
That is so interesting. Kelly, did you have something? I didn't want to interrupt you.
I was going to say what we're finding with a PTS in the military, they're saying that, what they're saying is that people tend to spiral. So you go to combat, you come back, you don't quite heal from that, you move along, you're maybe not being kind to the people around you or interacting with anyone around you, and then you face a breakup and then you spiral back down again. So you keep seeing this cycle of not being able to pull yourself up. And
Interesting. So how do you get to this mysterious theta state? I want to be there.
Yes. Well, so you have to get comfortable with experimenting a little bit. So what you're looking for, if right now I'm walking and talking, that's
which I can't do.
So that's not where you're trying to get. Delta state is when you're asleep. And there's this semi-conscious place that we call theta, where your brain waves are long and slow, but not as slow as down in delta. And here is where DHEA does its job. Here's where it's like the REM cycle for your muscles. This is where your restoration happens. A lot of people use meditation. Some people use prayer. My grandmother was Catholic and used to sit in her formal living room with rosary beads for hours. She was using tactile meditation to go to theta state. And so you kind of have to experiment a little bit to see what works for you, what gets you there, because actually a really recent study indicated we've been preaching meditation for everyone. If you're one of those people who you try for a few weeks to learn meditation and you really feel like it's not a fit for you, you can actually be elevating your blood cortisol levels to the point that you're not helping yourself.
Oh, got it.
Not
so it's almost like
a meditator.
Like stressing out over not being able to attain that.
I can't slow down. So you have to allow yourself some grace. I have a friend who gets their swimming laps. She talks about I'm trying not to drown when I'm swimming. So theta doesn't happen for me there. And you have to just experiment a little bit, but you're looking for that floating away. My favorite method is a class called Yoga Nidra, where you're lying supine and you've got all of these comfortable supports, and it's a very comfortable meditation. A lot of people fall asleep during it, but you're trying to get to theta state.
That is so interesting. When I was at Paris Island, I don't know if I ever told you this, Kate. I know I told Kelly and we wrote about it in the book. I really did believe that there was a connection, although I had no neuroscience background. I did believe that there was a connection between a lack of mental and physical rest and the types of misconduct and abuses that I was seeing by my drill instructors. And so one of the things that I did was I paid for yoga classes so that the drill instructors, they could just come and disengage. And it would be the one time in a 7-day training cycle week where they could just completely free their minds of anything. And I know that a lot of them struggled with the yoga part itself because, like me, they weren't as flexible. They didn't feel necessarily comfortable, but we had a great instructor, and the last 15 minutes was always spent with them laying down, just focusing on breathing. And I will tell you that experience and turning around and seeing all of them peacefully just being, it was good for me and it was good for my heart to see it, but it was really good for them. And we saw, with the focus on sleep and a focus on taking care of themselves, we saw a decrease in our levels of misconduct and stress. So I am a true believer, although I wish I could meditate. I'm in a course at Georgetown, and we start every single session with this centering And I just, man, if I'm not focusing on the clock ticking, I'm focused on the noise outside. I'm focused on, so I need to get to that point where I can do
You
what
might
you're
be a
talking about.
movement meditator. I think you might
Maybe.
be.
I fidget a lot, so probably, but the problem with that is then I'm distracting everybody else in the room, right?
Right. But what you were doing at Paris Island is completely evidence-based, because as you were giving them the opportunity to go to theta state, they were improving their emotional regulation, which is
I
your
believe it.
misconduct and your recruit abuse. So what you were doing was absolutely what actually DI school is looking at doing now. We have to
Wow.
do that sort of thing. We have to
Amazing.
focus on mental fitness training.
That is fantastic. That's so good to hear. And Kelly, do you get the theta state from ballet or do you get it from something else?
I actually get it from meditation. I try to
See,
meditate.
God, I want to be so like Kelly. That's good. Everybody needs that. So I feel good because I feel like even though I didn't know the science behind it, we were on the right track doing the right things, and that's great. Talking about, this year has been the Me Too movement. It's dominated the news, obviously starting with the events in Hollywood with Harvey Weinstein. But the Marine Corps has had its own struggles, and we're really marking the 1-year anniversary of the Marines United scandal, which was, for those of you who don't know, it was a big, huge scandal involving social media where Marines and former Marines were sharing illicit photos of female Marines without their consent. It was like a revenge porn thing, terrible, and really spoke to the problems in gender relations within the Marine Corps. But Kate, one of the things I wanted to say about you is that, you really came to lead the charge on being the public face, speaking out against that type of abuse last year in the media. So what do you think women in general, not just military women, what can they do to improve their ability to bounce back after that type of traumatic experience? What are some practical recommendations that you can give to us?
Well, the first is what we talked about a little bit earlier, the finding a community of people that understand, finding a community of allies so that your self-regulatory practices are built upon that foundation of strong social support, accountability partners. But then it's the self-care and the self-regulatory practices, which looks a little bit different for everybody, but it takes you to a place where you are optimally neurologically prepared for hardship. And then there's a lot of evidence behind the notion of spiritual practice. And whether you're looking at it secularly from kind of a transcendence perspective, humans have a need for purpose and meaning, or you're looking at it from a religious perspective and you're getting a lot of health benefit from religiosity. It's important for people to focus on their social support, their self-care and self-regulation, and their spirituality, whatever that looks like for them. And I think part of the power of the Me Too movement and the many people that stood up, including yourself, after Marines United and said, I recognize this behavior, I know it wasn't okay then, and it's not okay now, and we are going to band together as a cohesive tribe and try to make things better for the 18-year-old woman standing on the yellow footprints tomorrow. That was powerful. That was powerful. And I think the entire movement has improved the resilience of women just by becoming a movement in some ways.
That's awesome. That's the power of belonging.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Tell me, just out of curiosity, having grown up with a father who was in the military, was there ever a question in your mind that you would join another service, or did you always plan on joining the Marine Corps?
My dad was pushing the Air Force incredibly hard. He was an infantry officer, very much stereotypical and patriarchal in a lot of ways, but he loved his 3 daughters. So he was pro-military, but he wanted me to join the service where 24% of the members were also women. I just grew up around the Marine Corps. I liked the physical challenge. I liked the personality type. And the Air Force didn't feel the same to me. So I scared him a little bit, I think, when I decided to go to OCS, but he has always been very supportive.
And how did your experiences in the Marine Corps shape your thought process as you were writing Bulletproofing the Psyche, which I love. And I love the fact that there are little vignettes interspersed throughout the book where military members talk about their experiences. So how did that inspire you?
Well, and I hope it's okay to share that one of those vignettes actually that ties up our Where to Go From Here chapter is yours. I hope it's okay to drop that.
Thank you.
I think stories, I believe Brene Brown, stories are data with the soul. I am a researcher these days, and I really like understanding the science of things, but I feel like the heart of Bulletproofing the Psyche are the stories shared by service members and veterans who have talked about getting out and not understanding that they could have prepared themselves differently. And one story in particular was really interesting. There was a service member who now runs a nonprofit that is trying to bring mindfulness to the veterans community. He got very big into meditation, but he left the Army with a serious stress injury. And he happened to have a girlfriend that he later married who used to do things to take him to Theta state. She would experiment with running a hot bath or trying to teach him meditation or taking him hiking. And she basically helped him learn how to de-escalate his own nervous system. And he went from, angry and close to suicidal to healthy and helping other people and finding that purposeful outreach. So the stories like that are the most important component of Bulletproofing the Psyche. And I had such fun writing it. I edited, that's a hard word to say, that with a colleague I've done a ton of work with, and he is an Army veteran turned researcher. David Albright is his name, and he's down at the University of Alabama. But he left the Army after a horrible traumatic brain injury, really bad physical injury. And so he's come to be really the somatic practice and the going to Theta state is really important to him to function at a high level as a researcher. He needs it to stay sharp. So I think his influence and stories are powerful in the book as well.
Great.
And I've talked a little bit about, in her book, she writes about women being, a particular woman being afraid to come to her because Kate was preaching so hard to be strong, and as long as you're a strong person, these things won't happen to you. And she related it back to mental health, where she would have never done that with someone who was dealing with combat stress.
Right.
I think that we've got a lot of people who are worried that if they work toward resiliency or believe in resiliency, there's a kind of a backflow against benefits for combat stress. So how do you teach resiliency, which I very much believe in and have seen it work for myself? How do you teach resiliency without, while ensuring that it doesn't become a way to lay blame?
That's a great question.
And I think that is the biggest problem with the positive psychology, resilient space in general. And, Angela Duckworth's Grit certainly took a lot of criticism for basically saying that you're either resilient and successful or you're a loser that deserves the life you have. And I think you have to tread that very fine line of saying, yes, there are things that you can do. But when you teach resilience, you have to teach the human stress response. And there are a couple of things that take the human stress response into uncontrollable overdrive. And one is chronic stress that goes on for far too long. So staying in an abusive relationship for a really long time, or being in a job that is incredibly stressful for a long period of time. These long deployments that the Army in particular sends people on, or repeated deployments. Chronic stress is the first. And the second is stress of an unmanageable intensity. So you see this with traumatic incidents like assault or natural disasters, things of that nature. And then you have to have enough of an understanding that there's a severity spectrum for stress injury. You can use resilience to turn yourself around at the mild and moderate levels. If something becomes a major stress injury, it's a chronic condition that you're going to have to deal with for the rest of your life, and you're going to have to understand. So while it's empowering to understand that at the mild and moderate level, depression and stress injury are completely curable, there is such a thing as major depression and a majorly severe stress injury. Those are chronic conditions. So benefits are important, resources are important, and long-term management of those conditions is necessary.
Kate, can you talk a little bit about how your own health has impacted your mindset about resilience? I don't want to get too personal, but I know you're going through a pretty significant life experience right now. And I can't imagine how that's affected your family and yourself. So can you talk about that?
Definitely. Well, it's funny because I started this work because my life had become the Jerry Springer show post Marine Corps. And I've been very open about that. And I was recently diagnosed with metastatic breast cancer. But it had been about a decade, and I was starting to get back to my old self, which is I tend towards the press the gas, not the brake. Let me work a lot. Let me stay really busy. Self-care. I do it because I know it's important, but I'm not doing it as well as I should be. And I've just been slowed down and shocked and reminded of my own mortality over the last couple months. And it's this reminder that while much of what I do is in the military and veteran community, these principles of resilience and mental fitness, there's an entire community of people living with metastatic cancer who need these programs and who need this information. And now I'm one of them. And it's been a reminder to me, and I keep track of my exercise and my meditation and my yoga. And there's too many days where I go, oops, missed it. And that's just not acceptable anymore. So I think I'm doing some reevaluation of my own health practices and really hoping that I can find a way to make this work relevant to people living with chronic disease, because I've got this secondary degree in cancer now. Basically, I've learned so much. I didn't even know what stage 4 was. And I think my oncologist thought I was a little, maybe a little slow when I just looked at her and said, okay, what does that mean? So I've got a lot more to learn, a lot more to figure out, but mental fitness training matters for everybody, whether you're a new parent or you're a new professional starting out in a job. You want to bring your best self to everything. And for me right now, that includes battling cancer.
So I so appreciate your honesty and your willingness to share that. And I'm sure everyone else does too. And I can tell you that you're going to be a beacon of hope for not only people who are going through the same types of physical symptoms that you have, but also their families. Because I think one of the things I've talked to Kelly about, and I don't know if I've mentioned to you, but when my mom was ill with cancer, we felt like we were the only people going through that experience in the entire world. And it doesn't sound rational, but the reality is that when you're a family member, you feel so hopeless because you just have no control. So I think if we can somehow help to bridge that divide and help other people who are going through the same thing see that there's someone out there who gets it, who understands, it'll help them and make that path easier for them.
I still believe that the nicest thing somebody can say to another person is "me too."
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think being willing to share and connect is
absolutely
the kindest thing people have done for me.
It's a sign of trust, and in a world that we live in, trust is not always freely given. So
absolutely,
a good thing. Kelly, do you have any last minute saved rounds? I guess
just add us to your community. We're glad to be there for you. That's it.
Thank you. Thank you. It's such an honor to have chatted with both of you. And I really, I'm so glad you contributed to Bulletproofing, and I can't wait to read Fight Like a Girl. I think every woman Marine I know is going to be reading it. So there's at least that readership.
But no pressure. I really appreciate it, Kate. And I can't tell you enough how much we appreciate you coming on today and sharing your story, and keep doing the good work that you're doing. And I'm thrilled that Bulletproofing the Psyche is out and coming out. And we're just really excited for you. So just doing what you're doing, and our thoughts are with you, and let us know if we can help support your efforts.
Appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Take care, and thanks for coming on.
Thank you.